I'm Ryan Hale, and I worked as the Director of Sales at Toronto's Oak and Light Publishing for 15 years. I was known in the business as a builder, the person who transformed a struggling Midwest division into the company's most successful arm. I wasn't ostentatious or tech-savvy. I was a man of relationships. I was aware of my clients' anniversaries, the names of their kids and their concerns around upcoming releases. That was my advantage, and it was sufficient until lately. However, nothing gold endures. Jason, our new CEO, Veronica Bennett's youthful assistant, showed up at my office door on a gloomy Tuesday morning with a stiff frown. "She wants to see you, Ryan. It's 2 o'clock, boardroom for executives." I nodded slightly reassuringly and went back to my conversation with Franklin Press CEO Thomas Franklin. We were completing a $12 million 5-year contract that was based on trust wine over dinners and late-night phone calls across time zones rather than spreadsheets. I walked into the remodeled boardroom at precisely 2 o'clock, which featured sleek glass walls, minimalist furnishings, and a huge digital screen in place of the oak table where I had previously sat with the founder of the company. Jason and an HR person I hardly knew were sitting on either side of Veronica Bennett, who was seated elegantly at the head of the room. "Thank you for coming, Ryan," she said in a polished, rehearsed voice. "Thank you for all that you have done for Oak and Light. But we're taking a different approach as part of our digital transformation plan." I didn't wince, didn't dispute. I just shook her hand, nodded, thanked her, and walked away without losing my dignity. A 15-minute rendezvous cut short after 15 years. I carefully made my way back to my office and packed up my belongings, which included a brass plaque for sales leadership excellence, a little faded notebook with client information that no CRM system could equal, and a framed picture of my team from our record-breaking quarter in 2018. I felt a sharp sting at the back of my eyes as I went for the coffee mug my daughter got me, which read "World's Okayest Dad." I felt a deep aching hollowness instead of anger. When I looked around the office, the place I had molded, fought for, and defended. By the time I got to my car, my phone was lighted up with 3 missed calls: Jacob Myers, my assistant director, Eleanor Jenkins from Riverstone Press, and Thomas Franklin. News about publishing spreads quickly. I spent a lot of time behind the wheel observing the traffic in downtown Toronto outside the windshield. The towers were covered in long shadows from the harsh winter light. My wife Catherine was visiting our daughter Emma in Ottawa, and I wondered how I would explain to her that the man who had generated 60% of Oak and Light's income was no longer required. The text continued the following morning. "They are fools," Thomas said bluntly. "For the majority of us, you were Oak and Light." Eleanor was kinder, saying, "Call me when you're ready to discuss what comes next." By midday, I had received messages from more than a dozen important clients, all of whom expressed the same loyalty not to Oak and Light, but to me. I watched the snow fall outside while I stood in my kitchen with my fingers encircling a mug of cold coffee. My friend and longtime lawyer, Benjamin Weiss, buzzed on my phone once more. "I heard Ryan forward your exit documentation to me. Now let's examine the non-compete." I sat by myself in my home office that evening, surrounded by boxes of documents and keepsakes. I took up my team's little snapshot once more, with our arms wrapped around one another. We were giggling after landing the Bayfield contract. We had created a family, not simply a business. As Veronica's eyes scanned me as though I were already a relic, I recalled her polished speech and her vision of a digital-first future. However, she failed to realize that publishing was more than just data points, which she was unable to perceive in her spreadsheets. It had to do with humans. An idea started to germinate as the night grew darker, not with resentment, not in retaliation, but from something more genuine and incisive. The understanding that what they had discarded was not only outdated, but also irreplaceable. Again, my phone buzzed Jacob's message. "Give me a call, we must speak." And I experienced the slightest glimmer of a smile for the first time in 24 hours. Even though I had already figured out what Jacob wanted to say by the time I contacted him that evening, it still seemed real when I heard it directly from his mouth. "Ryan," Jacob said quietly, "it's bad over here." I leaned back in my chair, the soft creak of the wood echoing through my empty home office. "How awful." "They reassigned your accounts this afternoon. Franklin Press, Riverstone, even Bayfield. All handed over to the new digital sales team." He exhaled sharply. "They're green, Ryan. No experience with these kinds of clients, and the clients are furious." I closed my eyes. It was happening faster than I had expected. Veronica's pushing through a new CRM system, Jacob continued. Half the senior reps can't navigate it. People are walking around in a fog. 3 quit today? Outside the window, Toronto's city lights blinked against the winter night, sharp and cold. I tightened my grip around the mug in my hands, the one Emma had made in pottery class when she was 9. And the clients, I asked quietly. Jacob hesitated. Thomas Franklin hasn't returned calls. Eleanor Jenkins has been escalating complaints, and the internal projections, Ryan, they're catastrophic. I rubbed a hand over my face. The company I had built was unraveling, not because of market forces or bad luck, but because they had mistaken the heart of the business for a relic. Then Jacob's voice softened. There's more. I straightened to go on. Legal's watching you. They had a meeting about your non-compete clause today. They're worried you're going to poach clients. A dry laugh escaped me. I haven't called a single one. Jacob, they've all been calling me. I know, but it doesn't matter. They're setting a trap, Ryan. They're waiting for an excuse to come after you legally. We fell into a long silence, the kind that feels heavy even over a phone line. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. I wanted you to know, his voice dropped lower, and I wanted to give you this. There was a rustling sound like paper. Updated client contact lists, personal numbers, private emails off the record. I let out a slow breath, Jacob. I know, he interrupted. We never had this conversation. When the call ended, I sat in the stillness of the room, the soft hum of the furnace, the only sound. On the desk in front of me was a leather notebook, its corners worn smooth. Inside were handwritten notes, birthdays, client preferences, quiet anecdotes that no algorithm could ever replicate. I thought of Veronica's smooth smile, of Jason's worried eyes as he delivered. The termination meeting summons of the HR rep glancing anywhere but at me. I also thought of Thomas's furious voice, Eleanor's kind but clipped words, and Jacob Loyal, conflicted Jacob, risking his job to warn me. The next morning I stared long and hard at the envelope Jacob had slipped me. Temptation curled at the edges of my resolve. But I knew one thing for certain: if I took that bait, Oaken Light's lawyers would pounce. So I left the envelope untouched on the kitchen counter and stepped outside, pulling in a deep breath of sharp winter air. The streets were quiet, the snow freshly fallen. In that moment, a strange clarity washed over me. They had underestimated not just me, but the foundation I had laid. That day, I drafted a simple announcement: Walsh Hale Consulting. No website, no press release. Just a legal entity and a phone number. I sent it quietly to Benjamin, who chuckled over the phone. Not poking the bear, I see, he murmured, smart. By noon, Thomas Franklin called. I hear you've set up shop. His voice held a rare hint of humor. We need someone to clean up this mess. Interested? I leaned against the window, watching children drag sleds across the snowy park across the street. Not yet, Thomas, I replied evenly, but soon. As dusk fell, another message arrived. This time it was from Eleanor. When you're ready, we're ready. I read the words 3 times, then set the phone down, a slow smile spreading across my face. Without lifting a single finger, the tide was already turning. The first snowfall of December dusted Toronto in white, softening the sharp edges of the city. I sat at the kitchen table, Emma's mug in hand, watching the flakes drift past the window. My phone buzzed on the table, rattling against the wood. It was Thomas Franklin again, 3rd call this week. Ryan, Thomas began without preamble. We're running out of patience. This new digital team doesn't return calls, doesn't know our backlist, and just tried to push us into a marketing package we didn't ask for. Are you ready to talk now? I took a breath, feeling the pull of old loyalties. I'm not ready to poach clients, Thomas, I said calmly, but I am preparing something. Good, he snapped, because Eleanor Jenkins just told me she's done. And you know what that means. I did. If Riverstone Press walked, others would follow. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and stared at the plain file folder on the desktop, Walsh Hale Consulting draft notes. I thought of the years spent on the road shaking hands at tiny publishing houses, scribbling notes in margins, showing up when no one else would. Veronica and her team saw those as inefficiencies. I saw them as the only reason Oaken Light had survived. By afternoon, Jacob called. His voice was tight. It's chaos here, Ryan. Veronica's locked in the boardroom with the executive team. Half the sales staff are threatening to quit. They're scrambling. I leaned back in my chair. The chessboard was shifting piece by piece without me moving a hand. Jacob, I said softly, how are you holding up? There was a pause. I'm done, Ryan. He admitted I can't keep defending decisions I don't believe in. I smiled faintly. Then come see me tomorrow. Let's talk. That night, as I closed my laptop, Catherine arrived home from visiting Emma in Ottawa. She found me on the couch, staring into the quiet. You look lighter, she murmured, setting a hand on my shoulder. I think I whispered, I'm about to do something that matters again. The next morning, Jacob arrived at my house, bundled in his winter coat. A mix of tension and relief etched on his face. We sat in the sunlit kitchen mug steaming between us. I can bring half the old team, Jacob offered quietly. They're ready to walk. I nodded slowly. But we won't go after Oaken Light clients directly. We'll build something better and let them come to us. Outside, the neighborhood kids were building snow forts. I watched them, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. By the following week, the plan was in motion. Walsh Hale Consulting began taking shape, a collective rather than a company. Independent publishers across Ontario were eager to join forces, sharing resources, pooling distribution but maintaining their independence. Eleanor was the first to sign on, followed swiftly by Thomas. By Friday, we had 7 commitments and counting. Benjamin, my lawyer, reviewed the contracts with a wry smile. You've built yourself a fortress, Ryan. And the best part, you didn't swing a single sword. But the real turning point came on a snowy afternoon when I received an unexpected call. Ryan Hale. The voice was sharp, professional. Patricia Harrington, Oaken Lights Board. I straightened in my chair. How can I help you, Patricia? There was a brittle pause. We're aware of your activities. The board would like to remind you of your non-compete obligations. I laughed softly, Patricia. I haven't solicited a single Oaken Light client. They came to me. Be that as it may, she clipped, we expect compliance. I glanced out the window as the snow fell heavier, blanketing the city in quiet defiance. Have you asked the clients why they're leaving? I murmured. Silence. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, tracing a finger over the edge of Emma's mug. The symbol of years poured into a company that had discarded me, and yet here I was, rebuilding something truer, stronger. The next day, as I stepped into our small rented office, Jacob was already there, sleeves rolled up, a grin on his face. Ryan, we just got word Oaken Light's quarterly numbers are down 40%. Veronica's in trouble. I smiled quietly. This was only the beginning. The office space on Queen Street was small, but alive with purpose. Light poured through the big front windows. Catching on scattered coffee cups and whiteboards crammed with notes, Jacob sat across from me. Phone pressed to his ear while Marissa, our newly hired operations lead, mapped out timelines on her laptop. I ran a hand through my hair, watching the pieces fall into place. Eleanor Jenkins from Riverstone had just confirmed she'd bring 2 of her sister companies into the fold. Thomas Franklin was negotiating shared distribution contracts, and Jacob Sharp, exhausted but driven, was fielding calls from 3 other publishers who'd been tiptoeing toward the edge. This was no longer a consulting firm. This was a movement. That afternoon, I got a call from Benjamin, my lawyer. They're rattled, Ryan, he said, voice. Cool, Patricia Harrington called me. They're drafting a formal cease and desist letter. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling, let them. Benjamin chuckled. You really aren't worried, are you? No, I murmured, glancing around at the office. Because they're fighting the wrong war. The Oaken Light boardroom, I knew, was probably a flurry of panicked meetings. I could picture Veronica pacing the glass floor, tablet clutched in one hand, executives whispering urgently behind closed doors. But the truth was, simple trust doesn't live in contracts, it lives in people. Later that evening, Jacob and I sat on the balcony outside the office. Coffee steaming between our hands. The Toronto skyline glittered in the cold night. Remember when you first hired me? Jacob asked, a grin tugging at his mouth. You gave me a paper planner and told me, don't worry, the CRM system will confuse both of us. I laughed softly. Yeah, I never really made friends with the digital side. Jacob turned serious, Ryan. You're giving people something they haven't had in years, leadership they trust. His words landed heavier than I expected. For all the years I'd spent carrying a company on my back, it wasn't the salary or the title that had mattered. It was that people knew I would show up and stay. The next morning, Patricia Harrington's name popped up on my phone. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I walked to the old Oaken Light building. The glass facade gleamed cold and impersonal. Through the lobby window, I saw a receptionist I didn't recognize. A new guard at the door. No familiar faces, just a polished shell over a hollowed-out core. I pulled out my phone and flipped to a photo me, Catherine Emma, at a company picnic 5 years ago. Emma had been on my shoulder sticky with cotton candy, Catherine laughing beside me. That life felt like another lifetime, but it reminded me why I was here. Back at the office, Marissa waved me over. You need to see this. An article on her screen read, Oaken Lights Revenues Plunge Board Facing Leadership Reckoning. My heart thudded once, twice, then steadied. They're on the edge, Marissa said quietly. That night, Catherine found me in the living room laptop, open coffee cold on the side table. Ryan, she said softly, you can let it fall on its own. I looked up, meeting her eyes, I know. But this isn't about revenge. It's about building something better. Her lips curved into a small, proud smile. Then you already won. The next day, Eleanor called Ryan. The board just reached out to us. They want a meeting without Oaken Light. I exhaled slowly, a mix of disbelief and satisfaction tightening in my chest. They want in, I asked. No, Eleanor said, voice firm. They want out. As I hung up, Jacob stepped into my office, a quiet grin on his face. Ryan, you're not just winning. You're rewriting the rules. I glanced toward the window where snow began falling again, quiet and relentless. This was no longer about survival. It was about legacy. The morning after Eleanor's call, I stood in our small boardroom, sunlight flickering across the long oak table. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet energy. Jacob shuffled papers. Marissa tapped out last-minute emails. Across from me sat Thomas Franklin, his silver hair, neat eyes sharp with anticipation. We're ready to formalize, Thomas, said, voice steady. Riverstone, Franklin Press, and our sister companies are in. We want a cooperative agreement, equal stakes, shared influence. You lead him. The words hit me harder than I expected. I glanced at Jacob, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. Agreed, I said, exhaling. But this isn't a one-man show. We build this together. Thomas's face broke into a grin. That's why we followed you, Ryan. Not your title. Your heart. By noon, Marissa handed me a stack of signed agreements. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a deep sense of weight and responsibility. This wasn't just a counterstrike to Oaken Light. It was a blueprint for something new. That afternoon, Benjamin called again. Ryan, they're not threatening anymore, he said calmly. They're begging. I raised an eyebrow, pacing by the window. Define begging. The board has pushed Veronica to step down. They want to meet with you off the record. For a moment, the world seemed to still, all the long nights. All the years of loyalty dismissed in one cold meeting room, and now they wanted me back at the table. I met Jacob's gaze across the room. He'd heard Benjamin's voice, caught the tone. He shook his head softly, a quiet warning. That night, Catherine and I sat in the kitchen, a bottle of wine open between us. Are you going to meet them? She asked gently, resting her chin in her hand. I turned the wine glass between my fingers, watching the light catch in the deep red. I don't know, I murmured. There's a part of me that wants to walk in there and say, you don't get to have this both ways. But another part, I trailed off, searching for the words. Another part knows you've already won. Catherine finished, eyes warm. I smiled faintly. Yeah. The next morning, I sat on the bench outside our office, coffee, warming my hands against the brisk Toronto winter. My phone buzzed with a message from Benjamin. Board meeting, final vote outcome, likely in your favor if you engage. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Inside, Marissa waved me over. You need to see this. She spun her laptop toward me. The headline from the Globe and Mail read, Oaken Light CEO resigns amidst revenue collapse. Jacob came in a moment later, grinning wide. Ryan, the board just issued a public statement. They want to explore collaborative opportunities with us. For the first time in weeks, I let out a full, unguarded laugh. It wasn't bitter. It was light, clean, and free. They never understood, I said quietly, almost to myself. It was never about taking clients. It was about taking care of them. Marissa smiled softly. That's why they followed you. That evening, I found myself walking along the waterfront, Catherine's hand tucked into mine. The city sparkled across the lake, a quiet hum of lights and movement. I used to think success was proving them wrong, I admitted. And now Catherine asked, glancing up at me. Now I think success is building something, so right, they can't ignore it. As we turned toward home, a text buzzed on my phone. It was Eleanor, board meeting tomorrow. We want you there. For a moment, I stared at the message, feeling the gravity of it all. The rise, the fall, the quiet, persistent rebuilding. "We're not done yet," I murmured. The next morning, I stood outside the towering glass building that once housed OakenLight's headquarters. A winter breeze swept along Bay Street, tugging at the edge of my coat. I hadn't planned to come, but something inside me needed to see it just once more. Inside, the mood was tense. Board members shuffled in and out of the executive suite, their faces tight, voices low. Veronica Bennett was nowhere to be seen. The new interim CEO, David Kendrick, waited near the elevators, his expression carefully neutral. "Ryan, thank you for coming," David said as he approached, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his smile thin. "We're hoping today will mark a turning point." "I'm not here to rescue anyone," I said evenly. "I'm here because your clients deserve better." Inside the boardroom, the air was heavy with expectation. Thomas Franklin sat at the far end, a quiet sentinel of history. Eleanor from Riverstone gave me a small nod. Even Jacob, freshly resigned, had slipped into a back seat, arms folded, watching. David cleared his throat. "As you know, OakenLight has experienced challenges. We're proposing a formal partnership with the Walsh Consortium, effective immediately. Shared resources, joint initiatives, mutual client support." I listened without interrupting, arms folded across my chest. When David finished, the room waited, every eye on me. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of every year I'd given this place and every scar it had left. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, voice calm. "But the consortium wasn't built to patch failing giants. It was built to reimagine this industry." There was a stir around the table. A few exchanged glances, a flicker of surprise in David's carefully controlled expression. "That doesn't mean we can't work together," I added. "But it won't be under OakenLight's name, and it won't be under its terms." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and alive. When the meeting ended, I stepped out into the crisp air, my breath curling in little clouds. Catherine waited for me across the street, wrapped in a wool coat, watching quietly. I crossed over, feeling the old weight slip from my shoulders. "They asked you to save them, didn't they?" she said softly, falling in step beside me. I nodded, and I told them no. We walked for a while without speaking past the skating rink, the holiday lights flickering in the early dusk. Back at the consortium's office, the team was gathered around the long table, Marissa setting out coffee, Jacob reviewing contracts, Eleanor sharing a laugh with Thomas. I paused in the doorway, taking it all in, the hum of voices, the soft tap of keyboards, the unmistakable feeling of something alive and growing. On my desk sat an old photo, one I hadn't noticed in weeks, me, years younger. Surrounded by the original OakenLight team, all smiles, all promise. For a moment, my chest tightened. Then I set it face down, not in anger, but in quiet release. Later that night, Catherine and I sat on the balcony, a blanket over our legs, 2 mugs of tea warming our hands. "I thought this would feel like revenge," I admitted, "like I was proving something." "And now," she asked, leaning her head against my shoulder, "now it just feels right." The city stretched out before us, a tapestry of light and motion. Somewhere out there, OakenLight would wrestle with its own reinvention. Somewhere here, we would continue to build something real. As the wind stirred the edge of the blanket, I whispered the words that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "We're not here to take over. We're here to take care." And with that, I closed my eyes, feeling the deep, steady peace of a man who had not just survived his fall, but risen beyond it. There's a quiet kind of triumph that comes after surviving betrayal and injustice. A triumph that isn't loud or vengeful, but deeply satisfying. Ryan Hale's journey reminds us that this story is not unique. So many people face moments where they're cast aside despite years of loyalty and hard work. If you're going through something similar, know this: patience, integrity, and a calm, strategic mind are your greatest weapons. It's not about immediate revenge, it's about building something better, something lasting from the ashes. Thank you for spending your time with this story. I hope it offered not just entertainment, but also inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please drop a 1 in the comments and consider subscribing for more stories like this. And if you have your own story of resilience and justice, feel free to share it. Your voice matters here. Let's keep learning and growing together.